this was a moment. They had a little moment on the guy down in El Salvador. Remember Garcia, who was wrongly apprehended according to the government, although that story's been changing because Stephen Miller keeps making the point, hey, he was here illegally and he had been arrested before, and they wouldn't allow him out on bail because they were fearful that he was part of MS-13, and they had some verification of that, and they cited some of his tattoos, etc. So this came up in the interview, and it was a moment. Let's just say it was a moment. I got to play it for you because, wow, Trump was not having it, and nor was Terry, for that matter. It was quite a showdown. Watch.
He wasn't a member of a gang. And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute
well,
over that.
Wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattooed.
He had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
That was photoshopped. So let me
That was photoshopped. Terry, you can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime. You're doing the interview. I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay. I picked you, Terry, but you're not being very nice. He had MS-13 tattooed.
We'll agree to disagree. I want to move on to something else.
Terry, do you want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture.
And you think it was Photoshopped? Well,
here we go.
Don't Photoshop it. Go look at his hand. He had MS-13.
He did have tattoos that can be interpreted that way. I'm not an expert on them. I want to turn to Ukraine, sir. I want to get to Ukraine.
No. He had MS, as clear as you can be, not interpreted. This is why people no longer believe the news, because
when
it's
he was
fake
photographed
news.
in El Salvador, they aren't there. But let's just go on. They aren't there when he's in El Salvador.
They weren't there, but they're there now, right?
No,
but
they're in your picture.
Terry.
Ukraine, sir.
He's got MS-13 on his knuckles.
All right.
Okay?
Well, we'll take a look at that.
You do such a disservice.
We'll take a look at that,
Why don't
sir.
you just say, yes, he does, and, go on to something else?
It's contested.
Ooh. So that was one of those moments. Now, Terry's making the point that they were photoshopped in. I was not aware of that. What I was aware of was that there was actual evidence in the court of law that said he had certain markings that were indicative of being a gang member. Okay, so now I don't know if they were on his hands or whatever, but that was actually on file. So we'll see how this all shakes out in the wash. But I got to say, has Trump been really that wrong on anything? Every time, it reminds me of, remember when he said in May 2020, when the Fox reporter asked him about, was there any evidence that that virus came from Wuhan, China? And he said, well, yeah, actually, I've seen some evidence to that fact that it came out of the lab. I have seen some intelligence that suggests it came from that lab in Wuhan, China. And the whole world went, oh. And then all of a sudden, there were all these articles, a flurry of articles, the New York Times, Nature, Journal, whatever, all the science magazines, they slammed him. And that might have been around the time that he lost his Twitter account. I mean, it was like, how dare you? How dare you say that? They were like, oh, he's a crazy man. He's making stuff up. He wasn't making it up. In fact, I had sources going back as far as February of 2020 that had told me that that virus came straight out of the Wuhan lab in China. All right, so that information was being circulated, and people, they didn't have a particular bias in this. They actually said it was a mistake, and China didn't mean to do it. But I always thought, why is it that we're hiding that from people? Were we hiding that from people because we were worried about some World War III? Did Anthony Fauci have to communicate certain things? Did Anthony Fauci not want anybody to know the role that we may have played in funding an organization which then turned around and funded that lab? Those are questions, right? But Donald Trump put it all out there and everybody went nuts. Oh, and then there was that cats and the dogs thing, right? Wasn't that ABC too? Remember that? They were like, we have no evidence that the cats and the dogs, and then a week or two later, something surfaced that suggested there was actually a murkier gray ground on that story. Anyway, I digress. The point is, this was epic, okay? And this poor reporter who goes in there thinking he's got his big moment, I think actually probably did himself no favors in that, he's like constantly at battle. I'll just tell you this, as somebody who's interviewed many heads of state, including Democrats, okay, including the likes of Bill Clinton to Donald Trump. You need to be able to read the room, okay? And sometimes you get a little more with honey, right, than you do with going in with all the zingers. And so it's kind of like a give and take. And the more you can have that give and take, you got to pick your battles, right? But he just wanted to have, I guess it was a good show. Maybe he's been watching a little bit of cable or, some streaming stuff. He's trying to figure out how to be part of the future over at ABC News. Take a look at Donald Trump just moments ago speaking about the Garcia case to reporters. He had a cabinet meeting today, and as you know, so many of those are being broadcast live. Let's take a listen to him saying a few words about Garcia and basically saying, listen, we'll leave it to the lawyers. Here we go.
Mr. President, yesterday you told ABC News, Mr. President, you told ABC News yesterday that you could get Abrego Garcia back if you wanted to. Do you think President Bukele would turn you down if you made that request?
I really don't know. I know that he's been a great friend of our country. He's gotten a lot less money than this would take from us if we were going to build these jails and do what he's doing. And they run a very professional operation. I don't know. I haven't spoken to him. I really leave that to the lawyers, and I take my advice from Pam and everybody that is very much involved. They know the laws, and we follow the laws exactly.
So we'll see where this all shakes out. I mean, Stephen Miller has been pretty darn clear on this, has he not? The guy is from El Salvador. He was in the country illegally. If he comes back in, we will deport him again to where? El Salvador. Now, I don't actually think they can let him out of the prison. He's not in the really scary prison in El Salvador. He's in a different prison. He's been moved. We know that because, of course, the Maryland man, the other Maryland man, the senator, right? The Democrat senator, Van Hollen, went down there to visit with him, and he informed us that he had been moved to another prison. I suspect that they can't actually just let him loose on the street in El Salvador, because El Salvador is still a pretty dicey place, and there are, even though they've brought the crime down considerably, there are still people that would be out to get him. So that remains an open question at this point, but I'll tell you, this was just a humiliating experience overall for the reporter. It was great, TV, heck, here we are talking about it today. I don't think it did anybody any favors, though, over at ABC News. Not that you're looking for favors, right? Your job is to get the story, and you have to be willing to push back. I get it. But this became very contentious, and it's coming at a time when that is the last thing that ABC News and Bob Iger over at Disney need. I mean, they need, dare I say, they gotta have somebody like the woman on The View that's the conservative, with the long dark hair. You know who I'm talking about? That would have been more appropriate probably to have her, Alyssa, do the interview, just because it would have helped grease the wheels, at least for ABC. And then you can go in later with your Terrys or your Georgie Poos or whoever else you want. I don't think he would have agreed to Georgie Poo, though. He said he agreed to this guy because he didn't know who he was. Well, now everybody knows who he is, all right? Funny stuff. It's all coming, by the way, as a judge says, we need ICE to have warrants. We must have warrants if they are going to make any arrests of illegal migrants. It's kind of a wild story, and it's setting up this big showdown between state and federal government. I'll tell you, the federal government's going to win that all day long.